Hey party people, it's the Yellow Sheldon, back once again. So, across my desk today, an interesting piece came, and I thought I'd talk about it for a moment. We've all had that occasion where we're out prowling in the night, stealing people's garden gnomes and things like that, and the hideous ratcheting noise coming from our bicycle is not only a big distraction to our crime, which is important. Keep focused. Focus on what you're doing, even if it's bad stuff. But also, it's an impediment to being sneaky. So, we have stuff like this on the very loudest end of things. This is a Hugie Compact from back when it sounds like they had about 3 engagement points. It was more than that, but, they're a lot quieter because there's a lot more engagement points that move a smaller distance now. But, man, listen to this thing. So what came across my desk was a Shimano FH 8050, otherwise known as the silent clutch. Now, this was one of the first successful roller clutch hubs ever to exist. There were some earlier hubs that utilized a similar way of driving the wheel, and it didn't ever really take off or become an OEM item until the silent clutch hub. Now, I'd move heaven and earth for you, but about 200 foot-pounds of force is all I could muster. And wouldn't you know it, in typical Shimano fashion, I can remove the free hub body, and I can see how they've put it together. There's a 12mm hex interface in here, and there's the standard 10mm one in here. But, 4-foot cheater bar, the strongest tools I have, impact driver. I could just not get this apart to show you what it does. Basically, the gist with these roller clutch and also Sprag clutch hubs is that you have basically infinite points of engagement and no backlash. So, backlash, if you're not familiar, or lash, is the amount of a circle it takes. So there's 360 degrees. It's like the amount of degrees it takes to engage the next tooth inside of a ratcheting free hub. We have this zip one here. Nice light mechanism. Feels really nice. That was awesome. Someone's clearly stealing cars in the backyard. So, how these work, how most modern free hub systems work, and as far as I know, all freewheels, is you have pawls, P-A-W-L-S, which are these little things here, integrating with teeth somewhere else. So, there's many different ways you can do this. A lot of the ones that you see nowadays are done like this, where they have an external toothed ring, and then you have 2, 3, 4, however many pawls that you've decreed it necessary to have the proper amount of engagement and the lowest possible amount of backlash. So, there's different ways to do this. I think Industry 9 has offset pawls, so they have a lot of teeth on the ring, and at any given moment, the pawls, of which there are either 4 or 6, I can't remember, half of them are engaged and half of them are about to engage. So, if they're just 1/2 of a click off, you can imagine that rather than having to wait for the very next point of engagement, you cut that in half. They engage quicker because there is an additional set of pawls which is ready and waiting to engage with the ratcheting ring on the outside. So, this is a zip one. It's got 3 pawls. How this works is, see that center line that's been milled out of the red aluminum piece there? That actually contains a spring, which is exerting inward force, causing these to stick out. And in one direction, when you're coasting, or pedaling backwards, they can slide over the pawls like this. When you pedal forward, the pawls pop up because of the small springs that are underneath. Well, in some cases there's a small coil spring underneath, but in this case there's the circular spring on the outside. Causes the pawls to pop up and engage with the tooth, the teeth, the toth. And so, sliding over, engaging. But there is backlash. You see this movement here? Your pedals have to turn a small amount before the teeth will engage. Also, it's noisy. So, silent clutch, Sprag clutch stuff, the newest Onyx hubs, and I'll go through some of the examples of this that you can either buy or are vaporware or whatever in a second here, but they basically use a thing called either a Sprag clutch, which is a little bit different, and I'll get into it, or a roller clutch. The Shimano silent clutch is actually a roller clutch. And how this works, it'd be better if I show you this illustration. So, a lot like the pawls, but not, you have small rollers. Now these can be ball bearings, or these can be like a roller bearing where they're actually like a hardened steel tube. And these guys, in one direction, they will actually wedge, locking up the driving member much the same way as the pawl popping up will. And then in the other direction, because they've got springs behind them, they will actually roll into a little pocket, which gives them enough clearance to just roll silently with the sort of driven members or whatever. God damn, I'm an eloquent motherfucker. So, you know, I actually remember the ad copy for these hubs. They were like, you know, some pristine mountain pass, some piece of single track or something, and this person sort of off in the distance riding their bike, and it's like, don't let the noise get in the way of your enjoyment of nature or some such bullshit. So, I will say, it's the quieter, so for some of my like more vigorous nature rides, I don't care, you know what I mean? I don't care if I'm rocking a Chris King or a Hugie or DT Swiss. You know, the ratcheting is a reminder that I'm still alive. But for some of the calm ones where I'm just riding through a field by myself or in the forest somewhere, it's actually, I've had a set of these built up, and it's really nice. When you coast, all you hear is sort of the gravel and rocks crunching under your tires. And if you roll through grass, you don't hear anything. It's really wonderful. So, you know, back in the day, I can't remember if it was like Bendix or Torpedo or somebody like that. They had an internally geared hub that had somewhat of a roller clutch in it. That's the earliest example I could find. You know, moving forward, eventually you had Shimano silent clutch. There's if you search for a zero backlash hub on Google, you'll find a company called F-Neo, so EFNEO. I think it's probably something similar to this. They have very little info on their website. And what's more, you know, they're like, I'm taking pre-orders for this groundbreaking hub, which is going to change the world. But they've been taking pre-orders since like 2015, and it's 2018, so it might be vaporware. There was one in the early 2000s, late 90s, called Winners. It needed a special cassette, and it used a like unsealed roller bearing system, a roller clutch system, and by all reports it was really unreliable. And sort of moving into the future, you now have the choice to buy something that is not vaporware called Onyx, O-N-Y-X. So Onyx hubs, they're like a double row of Sprags. So, like this. And the Sprags are a little bit different than the rollers. So the Sprags have more of a complex shape. You know, with the rollers, you basically have either tubes with like a pin in the center, and these are imparting force just along the edge where it meets the two surfaces. Sometimes they're ball bearings, and so those are also very susceptible to, you know, high pressure and low grip at the points where they're interfacing, you know, the the place where you're imparting the torque and the place where you're exporting it to drive the wheel. A sprag is a little bit different. So it's like a complex shape that is machined, and some of them are like, I don't know, like figure eights, like rounded rectangles basically. And how these work is that, you know, when you are coasting, it sort of pivots out of the way, allowing you to coast. And when you are pedaling forward, it's designed in such a way that, and there's going to be a lot of them, you know, as you could see from this, there's tons and tons and tons of those with an external ring spring, just like the one that holds the pawls on this hub out. So, little Sprag fellas, the little Mr. Peanuts that you have right here. Oh yeah, that's great. Let's make it Mr. Peanut. So we have a lot of Mr. Peanuts that are in distress inside of our hub. When you pedal forward, this sort of cams in such a way, and you can engineer it in such a way that a larger surface area, yeah, see, he just shit himself. This surface area here, and the one up here, and now his brain's bleeding, those, you can engineer them to have a bigger, like, contact patch with the surfaces that they're working against. And there'd be lots of them. You know, you'd have Mr. Peanut's, like, daughter, and his mom, and his wife. There's all kinds of people in there. And pedaling forward engages all of them at once. Coasting pulls them back, and the two surfaces are allowed to slip past each other. So, I've never held an Onyx hub. I'm guessing, looking at the sort of engineering and the fact that they're a real company, not a vaporware company that's still selling product, I'm guessing this works quite well. And because you have a larger contact area, or you could sort of engineer the properties of your little Sprag clutch guys here, you know, it should be more reliable than a traditional roller clutch hub. You know, this costs this. Imagine precisely machining all of those little fuckers in there. So I can see why people wanted to do this initially, but, you know, the cars, transmissions, starter motors, all this shit uses Sprag clutches, and so it seems to be the most durable way to do it. There is an additional development from a company called Chosen. I think it's the same company as the one that is called Chosen. There was a company for a while that was like out of, you know, the Far East, that was like this, and they made hubs and shit. I think that they've now gone to just being called Chosen. Anyway, this is interesting. I obviously couldn't look at like a patent for this. I can't see the inner workings of this design. But they have this new silent free hub system where basically it appears to be a hybrid of the two designs. So you can see here, clearly, we have a traditional pawl system. But this ring here, as far as I understand it, has a small roller clutch cam system inside of it. So when you start coasting, it actually pulls the pawls completely down. So when you're coasting, the pawls are not engaging whatsoever. They're not going click, 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 click. They're just sliding past as if it was a roller clutch hub. When you start pedaling again, this piece here actually pushes the pawls back into service. So that's a pretty interesting way to do it. I like it. I'm sort of wondering what these are, if this is for disassembly or if, I mean, God, probably what's under here, this is probably like a grub screw with like a hex fitting, and you unscrew it, and underneath is, I'm guessing, like a coil spring and a ball bearing. Maybe not, though. Maybe they're rivets, who knows. But I would love to play with one of these. It's an interesting take on sort of an old problem of noisy hubs. So, you know, that's about it in terms, oh, one more. Alfine hubs, like the multi-speed Shimano hubs, some of those have a roller clutch in them. So Shimano didn't completely give up on it. And yeah, boys and ladies, I really tried to get this apart for you. I wanted to take this down to bare bones so I could show you exactly how it worked. Now, they don't make these anymore for good reason. They were pretty unreliable. So, number one, a lot of the components, it seemed, would sort of... have you ever had Brunelling on a headset? So it's this phenomena where, like, you know, you have ball bearings, front and rear, are taking most of the brunt in your headset. And as you go over bumps, they rock back and forth, and they eventually sort of, you know, I've never seen it under a microscope, but how it's described is they sort of weld and then break, and then weld and then break, and then weld and then break until they've created these little divots in the cup that they're riding in. And that's when you get SIS, Shimano Index Steering, as we call it in the business, where you can turn your bike left, you can turn your bike right, but there's these detents where your handlebars will actually go. They'll be like indexed into 2 or 3 positions. So you can imagine that in these roller clutch hubs, the bearings, they're just acting like a wedge. In one direction, they simply wedge into place. There's probably some deformation that occurs each time. And over time, that wears, and eventually you get a little dimple where it gets jammed. And so in that case, it wouldn't freewheel. It would just be stuck in both directions. They also... anything that has a spring and relies on the spring moving a piece in order to engage it. See, you know, shifters, index shifters do this all the time. In cold environments or with heavy grease, you'll find even traditional free hub bodies seizing up in this way, or freewheels. And especially these, because of sort of what's going on inside. When it got really cold out, they would stop functioning. They would freewheel in both directions. So we have 2 sort of failure modes. One in which you're basically riding a fixed gear. This is always working. And number 2, in which it'll just freewheel in both directions. So that's not good. I am encouraged by Sprag clutch designs. I want to see, and I guess they're working on them, magnetic pawl hubs that don't use a metal spring. I mean, it seems like you could put some neodymium magnets inside a hub and have the repulsion that pushes the pawls up be from magnetism. That would be pretty neat. I also want like a nuclear-powered, like magneto-bearing bicycle. I don't care that it weighs 10,000 pounds, because it'll be 0G at the hub shell. I'll just have my axle floating inside the hub shell using my like nitrogen-cooled, nuclear-powered hub motor. Yeah, that's about all I have to say on that. It's neat. If you can find one of these in good working order, and it's free or very cheap, maybe pick it up and see how you like riding through nature on something that's completely silent. Otherwise, I would say avoid at all costs, because outside of eBay and the one in my hands, you're not going to find replacement roller clutch units for these. You know, if you were gonna fuck with it, I would say get the Onyx hubs and get yourself a replacement rebuild kit and just keep it in a drawer somewhere. You never know how long these companies are going to stay in business. But yeah, interesting thing that came across my desk. Just wanted to talk a little bit about roller and Sprag clutches. Yellow Sheldon out.